The prison transport drifted through the void, a silent monolith against the tapestry of distant stars. Penal Station 09 loomed ahead, its hulking metal structure orbiting a lifeless moon like a parasite, clinging to a corpse. To the Xantrix, it was a mere holding facility, a dumping ground for criminals, war captives, and rebels too dangerous to be executed outright. To the humans aboard, it would soon be something else entirely. Elias Voss stood among the detainees, wrists bound, in shimmering energy restraints. His uniform, once the proud insignia of a Terran fleet commander, was torn and stained, reduced to little more than rags. The scars on his knuckles told stories of battles fought in places the Xantrix didn't even consider worth remembering. His face, however, remained unreadable. The guards, towering figures encased in obsidian armor, marched the prisoners forward. Xenon gas hissed from unseen vents, a decontamination protocol meant to sterilize any potential biocontaminants. It also served another purpose, to remind the captives they were nothing more than specimens in a controlled experiment. Voss had seen this place before, not with his own eyes, but in the intelligence briefings before his capture. Penal Station 09 was infamous not for its brutality but for something far worse, its efficiency. As he walked, his gaze flicked to the others in the procession. A mix of species, but humans were the majority. Some were soldiers, some civilians caught in the crossfire of interstellar politics, and among them, a woman. Her dark eyes scanning the environment with cold calculation. Dr. Lyra Tenzin. She had been a respected xenopsychologist, once tasked with unraveling the mysteries of alien cognition. But she had made the fatal mistake of studying human adaptability too closely. The Xantrix didn't like questions they couldn't answer. A sharp electric pulse ran through the restraints, sending a jolt through every captive. A mechanical voice echoed from the station's speakers, emotionless yet laced with the arrogance of absolute control. You are now property of the Xantrix Dominion. Your existence is at the mercy of our will. Comply, and you may serve a purpose. Resist, and you will be erased. The words meant to instill fear barely registered with Voss. They thought this was just a prison. They didn't understand what they had gathered in one place. The docking bay doors yawned open, revealing the interior of the station. It was not a prison. It was an arena. The scent of iron and ozone filled the air, an acrid reminder of battles, fought and lost. The arena stretched before them, a coliseum of metal and energy barriers. It wasn't just a place of confinement, it was a spectacle. Above them, holographic displays flickered to life, showcasing past matches. Xantrix nobles and warlords placed wagers on the lives of prisoners. The wealthy amused themselves by pitting captured species against one another, their fates decided by the whims of those who had never fought a battle themselves. Voss had expected cruelty. He hadn't expected this level of arrogance. The guards shoved the newcomers into the holding cells. The energy barriers hummed, flickering briefly as their captors disengaged the restraints. No chains were needed here. The environment itself was the cage. Voss stepped forward, scanning the cell's other occupants. Weathered faces, eyes that still held a spark of defiance, and then from the shadows a voice. Low, controlled. You must be the war hero, Rhys Donovan. The name had circulated in classified reports, special ops presumed dead after an ambush on the colony world of Jericho 4. Yet here he was, alive, and by the look of him, thriving in this hellhole. Voss met his gaze, noting the scars, the hardened expression of a man who had adapted to an impossible situation. They send us here thinking we'll break, Donovan continued, his voice edged with something dangerous. What they don't realize is that this isn't a prison, it's a proving ground. Tenzin exhaled sharply. You've survived here for how long? A year, longer than most. And in that time, I've learned one thing. Donovan leaned closer, voice lowering to a whisper. The Xantrix think they're testing us. They don't realize we're studying them too. Voss felt something cold and powerful settle in his chest. Hope, laced with the fire of inevitability. They had gathered the strongest, the most resilient. They had forged them in fire and steel, and now they had trapped them all together. The fools had built a crucible. The walls of Penal Station 09 pulsed with the distant roar of the arena. A rhythmic, thunderous sound, the alien equivalent of a cheering crowd. Voss sat against the cold metal of the cell, arms folded, gaze steady. He wasn't just watching, he was calculating. Across from him, Rhys Donovan leaned forward, his voice low, urgent. "You need to understand something, Commander. This place isn't about keeping us locked up. It's about breaking us publicly." A scream echoed through the corridors, guttural and alien, the sound of something dying violently. Donovan didn't flinch. He just gestured toward the force field that separated them from the rest of the station. They pit prisoners against each other. Species they consider inferior, weak. It's a blood sport for the elites. His voice darkened. Humans? They think we're bottom tier. We weren't supposed to last this long. Voss exhaled slowly. But we have. Donovan nodded. And that scares them. From the other side of the cell, Dr. Lyra Tenzin adjusted, her broken glasses, eyes scanning the energy field. They study us, you know. Our pain tolerance, our cognitive resilience. But they keep missing something. A flaw in their logic. Voss raised an eyebrow. Tenzin smirked, pushing herself up from the bench. They assume suffering weakens a species. Her gaze flicked toward the arena where another round of combat had begun. They don't understand that for humans, suffering is fuel. The force field shimmered. 2 guards stepped forward, hulking figures clad in obsidian armor. The taller one motioned toward Voss. "You, chosen for the next round." Tenzin's jaw tightened. Donovan didn't move, but his fingers curled into fists. Voss pushed off the wall with deliberate slowness, stepping forward. There was no fear in his stance, only readiness. As they marched him down the corridor, the station seemed to tighten around him. The scent of ozone, the hum of energy fields, the distant sound of something being torn apart. They brought him to the pit. The arena was larger than he expected, a shifting labyrinth of metal and jagged terrain, designed to entertain the masses. Above him, holograms projected betting odds, flashing statistics of previous fights. Voss barely registered the details. His focus locked onto the thing standing at the opposite end of the battlefield. It wasn't human. It stood at least 8 feet tall, with chitinous armor plating and 4 serrated limbs that clicked against the ground. A Kordathi. The crowd cheered. Voss exhaled through his nose. They thought this was a fair fight. The klaxon blared. The fight began. The Kordathi moved first, lunging with a speed that belied its size. 4 limbs, each tipped with a different kind of blade. Voss sidestepped, fast, controlled. Don't meet strength with strength. Make them miss. The first strike carved into the arena floor where he had been a second ago. The second strike grazed his ribs, slicing fabric but not flesh. Good. Let it think it's winning. The Kordathi clicked its mandibles in frustration. It had fought humans before. It knew they were fragile, slow, weak. Voss smiled. The alien lunged again, this time faster, adjusting its pattern. It was smart, but humans were smarter. Voss feinted left, then twisted his body mid-step. The Kordathi adjusted but not fast enough. His boot hit its knee joint with full force, a sickening crack. The Kordathi screeched, stumbling. Voss didn't let it recover. He moved fast. Up. Inside its guard. One hand locked around its mandibles. The other drove a stolen shiv straight into its throat. A heartbeat passed. Then the Kordathi collapsed, limbs twitching, dark ichor pooling around it. Silence. Then the crowd erupted. The human had won. Voss stood over the corpse, breathing steady, mind racing. He had sent a message, one the Xantrix wouldn't ignore. A voice crackled in the arena's sound system. Cold, clinical. Interesting. This one is adaptable. Voss looked up. A Xantrix overseer, watching from a high platform. Its bioluminescent gaze studied him the way a scientist might observe an unpredictable test subject. Then, the overseer's mandibles twitched into something almost resembling a grin. Let's see how long you last. The force field deactivated. 3. More doors opened, and 3 more creatures stepped into the arena. From his cell, Donovan slammed his fist against the wall. They're testing him. Tenzin's fingers curled around the bars, eyes burning with realization. No. They're trying to break him. Oren Drax, the Xantrix prisoner who had been silent until now, finally spoke. They don't understand, do they? His alien voice was low, thoughtful. They are not testing a human. They are testing what happens when a human refuses to die. Donovan smirked. Yeah. He turned toward the others. And they're about to learn a hard lesson. The second fight lasted longer. The third was shorter. By the fourth, Elias Voss was bleeding. Not broken, not finished, but bleeding. The arena floor was slick with a mixture of human blood and alien ichor. His breaths came heavy, shoulders rising and falling. His muscles ached from strain, his knuckles raw from where he'd driven them into something that had too many bones. But he was still standing. Above him, the Xantrix overseers whispered among themselves. Their experiment was not going as planned. Back, in the cell, Donovan watched the screens. How many has he taken down? Tenzin didn't look away from the holographic feed. 4. The 5th is moving in. Donovan's jaw tightened. They're escalating. Oren Drax exhaled sharply. They are afraid. His alien gaze flickered. They do not understand why he will not die. Tenzin turned to him. Do you? The ex-soldier considered for a moment before responding. Humans do not fight like other species. They should not last against these odds, but you, his mandibles twitched. You adapt, you endure. The more they push, the stronger you become. Donovan grinned. Now you're getting it. But Tenzin wasn't smiling. Her mind was working through something else. They've miscalculated. They think they're testing physical endurance. She shook her head. But what they're really doing is teaching him how to win. She turned to Donovan. If we don't act, now they'll start adjusting their methods, and if they figure out how we work before we take control, Donovan's smirk vanished. Then we all die. The 5th opponent was different. Voss could tell the second it stepped onto the field. It didn't charge blindly like the others. It waited, studied. Voss clenched his fists. They were learning. This one was sleek, its elongated skull ridged with pulsating bioluminescence. A predator, a true hunter. It circled him, slow, calculating. It knew he was dangerous, but it didn't fear him. That was a mistake. The next few moments happened fast. The creature lunged. Voss dodged barely, a fraction too slow. A claw sliced across his shoulder, pain flaring red-hot. He rolled, hitting the ground hard. His vision flickered. His body was reaching its limit. But limits were just a suggestion. The creature went for the kill shot, a downward strike, aiming to pin him. Voss twisted at the last second. A feint. He grabbed its arm, wrenched, snapped. It screeched. The sound was pure agony. Voss drove his elbow into its throat. Once, twice, a third time until something collapsed inside. The thing spasmed, twitched, then fell still. The arena went, silent, and then the gates opened. Not another opponent. Something worse. The guards stormed in. 4 of them. Their energy weapons hummed with lethal intent. Voss took a step back, fists clenched. He was spent. He had nothing left. But he would not kneel. One of the overseers spoke, voice echoing across the arena. Enough. A moment passed. Then another. And then the overseer laughed. Fascinating. Voss gritted his teeth. You survive longer than most. And you adapt. That is dangerous. The alien's eyes gleamed. But also useful. Voss said nothing. He was waiting. Calculating. We will see what else you are capable of. Put him back in his cell. He has potential. The guards advanced. Voss did not resist. Not yet. He had seen enough. He had learned enough. and he was done playing their game. Back in the cell, Donovan and Tenzin were waiting. The moment Voss was thrown in, the energy barrier shimmering back into place, Donovan was already speaking. "They're scared of you now." Voss nodded, rubbing his sore wrist. "Good." Tenzin leaned forward. "We have an opening, but not for long." Donovan grinned. "Then we take it." Voss exhaled. His body was breaking, but his mind was sharper than ever. They had played along long enough. Now it was their turn. The uprising began in silence, not with a battle cry, not with the roar of defiance. Just a whisper, a signal, a knowing glance between those who had suffered long enough. And then, all at once, hell broke loose. The guards never saw it coming. The humans had learned the patterns, how the shifts rotated, where the weapons were stored, which alien species could be broken with brute force and which needed something sharper. The moment the cell doors flickered open, just for half a second during the nightly power recalibration, they struck. Voss was first out. The first guard barely had time to turn before his throat was crushed beneath a stolen baton. To the left, Donovan had already tackled another, ripping the plasma rifle from its hands and using it to cut down two more. Tenzin wasn't far behind, moving with brutal precision. She wasn't a soldier, but she was a survivor, and survivors knew where to strike. The halls erupted into chaos. Oren Drax, the ex-Xantrix soldier, joined the fight. A traitor to his people, a believer in something new. He tore through his former comrades like they were paper. The Xantrix panicked. For centuries they had ruled without question, controlled every species beneath them. They had never imagined a full-scale revolt, especially not from the species they had thought too weak to matter. The prisoners surged forward, an unstoppable force of fury, desperation, and revenge. The halls of Penal Station 09 ran red, security systems collapsed. Power failures flickered through the station as Tenzin hacked into the system, cutting communications, rerouting defenses. Donovan led a strike team toward the armory. Within minutes, humans and their newfound alien allies were armed to the teeth. Voss moved toward the control center, because the station wasn't just a prison, it was a broadcasting hub, and it was time for the entire galaxy to hear the truth. The overseers watched in disbelief. One of them trembled, his bioluminescent markings flashing in distress. This is not possible." The leader, taller, more composed, just stared at the security feeds. The humans were tearing through their defenses like wildfire. "End it," the leader hissed. The command went out, and the failsafe activated. The station's core began to overload. Final contingency. If they could not control the experiment, they would erase it. The alarms blared. "Voss!" Tenzin's voice came through the stolen comms. "They're going to blow the station." Voss gritted his teeth. They couldn't let that happen. There were still hundreds of prisoners on board. Humans. Allies. If the station went down, so did the revolution. Voss turned to Oren Drax. "How do we stop it?" The alien exhaled sharply. "We don't. The detonation sequence is locked. The only way to override it..." He hesitated. Voss already knew. They had to reach the core. Through collapsing corridors. Through waves of desperate Xantrix forces, the prisoners pushed forward, relentless. Voss led the way, his body battered but his will unbreakable. They reached the core. Tenzin hacked in. "The overload is past the failsafe. We can't shut it down." Voss's mind raced. There had to be another way. His gaze flicked to the station's emergency evacuation controls. They couldn't save the station, but they could send a message. All across Xantrix-controlled space, screens flickered, a human face appeared, bloodied, bruised, unbroken, Elias Voss. His voice carried across the stars. "You think we are weak. You think we are lesser. You think this is over." His eyes burned. "You're wrong." The signal cut, and the humans escaped. The station exploded behind them, but the revolution had already begun. The shockwave rippled outward, a silent explosion in the void of space. Penal Station 09, The unbreakable symbol of Xantrix dominance was no more. The fleeing transports rattled from the force, but the humans inside were already watching the flames die in the darkness behind them. Voss sat at the front of the stolen Xantrix transport, blood crusted on his face, his breathing heavy but steady. His fingers gripped the controls with the tension of a man who had barely survived but had no intention of stopping now. Tenzin was beside him, running her hands over the flickering control panels, rerouting power to stabilize the ship. The gravity of what they had done was setting in. Donovan sat against the hull, reloading a stolen plasma rifle out of habit, even though there was no immediate threat. His smirk was gone, replaced by a quiet, simmering certainty. Xantrix stood in the back of the ship, staring at the wreckage of the station through the viewport. His kind had built that prison. Now it was nothing but debris. He exhaled sharply. They will come for us. Voss didn't look away from the darkness ahead. Let them. Across the Xantrix Dominion, the message spread. The prison was gone. The broadcasts were intercepted. The galaxy had seen what the humans had done. And for the first time in history, the Xantrix feared. The species they had underestimated, the creatures they had thought weak and primitive, had torn apart their most secure facility, slaughtered their warriors, and sent a message across the stars. They hadn't just escaped. They had declared war. Aboard the stolen ship, the survivors gathered. Tenzin rubbed her temples, exhaustion weighing down on her. We need a plan. We can't just drift into open space. The Xantrix will be hunting us. Donovan leaned back. We just sent a giant middle finger to the entire Dominion. There's no way we can hide now. Voss tapped a few controls on the holomap, pulling up distant star charts, territories, potential allies. We don't need to hide. We need to strike before they can regroup. Tenzin frowned. That's suicide. Not if we're smart. Voss turned toward Xantrix. The Xantrix have enemies. Who hates them the most? Oren's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. There is a resistance. Scattered, weak. But they will hear your message. They will know what you've done. Then we find them. Voss's voice was iron. And we show them what humans can do. The stolen ship vanished into the void. Behind them, the ashes of Penal Station 09 floated like a funeral pyre in the silence of space. But this was not the end. This was the beginning of something far greater. The Forsaken Legion had been born, and the galaxy was about to learn exactly what that meant. Somewhere in deep space, a transmission played. Flickering blue light illuminated the darkened chamber, reflecting off cold, inhuman eyes. The figure stood still, watching, listening. The human's face, bloodied but unbroken, stared back from the holographic feed. You think we are weak. You think we are lesser. You think this is over. A pause. You're wrong. The message ended. Silence filled the chamber. Then, a low, measured voice spoke. Fascinating. The Xantrix High Council had convened. The chamber was vast, filled with the highest-ranking minds of the Dominion. The air pulsed with bioluminescent signals, flashes of warning, of unease. This was unprecedented. This was unacceptable. The humans had not only escaped, they had defied the natural order. The overseer responsible for Penal Station 09 stood before them, trembling. The experiment. It has failed. The Supreme Warden's eyes burned with cold fury. No, the experiment has evolved. Whispers spread. Calculations ran through their neural interfaces. How could this happen? How could a species so fragile, so biologically inferior, survive what was meant to destroy them? One of the counselors, an elder whose mind stretched across centuries of conquest, spoke at last. We were wrong about them. We assumed they were prey. But prey does not turn the hunter's blade against them. Prey does not rally others to its cause. Prey does not adapt. A second voice, colder, more mechanical, followed. The Forsaken Legion will spread. The other subjugated species will see what they have done. They will rise. The Supreme Wayboard, the S, They had been tested in fire, and now they were ready to burn the Dominion to the ground. Far away, in an unknown sector of space, a fleet was mobilizing. But they were not Xantrix ships. They were something else. Something older. Something that had been waiting. A single message blinked in the void, sent from an unknown source. You are not alone.